The Kreth Dominion had never lost a war. Not once. Not in 164 campaigns spread across 40 star systems and hundreds of years of conquest. They had burned civilizations, shattered fleets, and left nothing behind but silence and dust. Every species they had ever faced had either surrendered or been destroyed. To the Kreth, war was not a struggle. It was a process. Clean, fast, and always ending the same way. Fleet Admiral Doran Vel stood at the tall observation window of his command ship and looked out at the stars. He was a tall creature, gray-skinned, with 4 narrow eyes that never showed warmth. He had led 42 campaigns himself. 42 victories. He had never seen a battle go wrong. He had never felt what it was like to lose. Because of that, he had stopped thinking it was possible. Word had come in from the Dominion's long-range scout ships. A small, wet planet near the edge of a quiet solar system. Third from its star. Mostly blue when seen from space, with patches of brown and green. The species living there called themselves humans. They had been alive for only a short time by the standards of the galaxy. They had not yet expanded beyond their own moon in any serious way. They had wars among themselves. They were divided into hundreds of groups that could not even agree on simple things. The intelligence report was brief. The Dominion's analysts had rated humans as a Class 3 primitive species. Dangerous to each other, but not to anyone else. Their weapons were crude. Their ships were few. Their defense systems were old. The report said that a full assault fleet was not even necessary. 1 wing of warships would be more than enough. Doran Vel read the report twice. Then he closed it and called in his senior officers. He told them they were going to Earth. His officers did not ask questions. They had been with him long enough to know that when Doran Vel made a decision, it was already finished in his mind. There was nothing to discuss. There was only execution. 3 days later, a single Kreth Herald ship broke out of faster-than-light travel near Jupiter, the giant planet at the edge of Earth's solar system. It sent a signal. The signal was translated automatically by the communication systems humanity had built after making contact with other species years earlier. The message was short. It said that the Kreth Dominion was claiming this solar system. Humans had 72 hours to surrender all military assets, dissolve their governments, and accept Dominion rule. Failure to comply would result in total destruction. The signal was picked up first by a young officer named Lyle Carter. He was stationed on a small defense post near the outer edge of the solar system, running routine checks when the message came through. He read it 3 times, blinked slowly, and then sent it immediately to Earth. On Earth, in a quiet room deep inside a defense complex, Admiral Grace Nguyen read the message. She was not a loud woman. She did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She sat still for a moment, her eyes moving across the words again, and then she set the paper down and pressed a button on her desk to call the Global Defense Council together. When the council met, some members wanted to try negotiating. They argued that the Kreth were powerful, that humanity was not ready, that it would be better to stall for time. Grace listened to all of them. Then she spoke. She said, "The Kreth have burned 164 civilizations. They do not negotiate. They never have. If we go to them with open hands, they will see weakness. And weakness, to them, is just a reason to move faster." She looked around the room. "We are not going to surrender," she said. "We are going to fight." No one argued after that. The 72-hour countdown had already begun. And across Earth and its orbital stations and its hidden defense networks, quietly and without panic, humanity began to prepare. The Kreth were very good at reading weakness. That was one of the reasons they had won 164 times. Before every campaign, they sent scouts. The scouts watched, measured, recorded, and reported. They looked at military size, weapon types, ship counts, and defense formations. They made careful notes. And based on those notes, the Dominion's commanders planned their attacks. But the Kreth had one blind spot. They only looked for what they expected to find. When their scouts passed through Earth's solar system in the months before the ultimatum, they saw what they were looking for. A small number of outdated ships near Earth. A few orbital stations that looked old and lightly armed. Some communication satellites. Nothing that matched Kreth military power in any way. The scans came back clean. The analysts looked at the data and confirmed what Doran Vel already believed. Earth was weak. The campaign would be easy. What the scouts did not find was the Grey Veil. Dr. Nina Park had spent 11 years building the Grey Veil. She was a physicist who worked for Earth's Unified Defense Program, a quiet woman who liked working late at night when the labs were empty and still. She did not think of herself as a soldier. She thought of herself as someone who solved problems. And the problem she had been asked to solve was simple. How do you hide a fleet of warships from an alien scanner? The answer she found was not obvious. Rather than trying to block the scans entirely, she built a system that made the ships look like background noise. The Grey Veil did not create invisibility. It made things boring. Sensors would pass over a gray-veiled ship and read it the same way they would read empty space. Not worth noting, not worth recording. The human ships had been sitting inside Earth's defense rings for over a year. The Kreth scouts had passed right over them and seen nothing. There were 400 gray-veiled warships waiting in those rings. There were also 6 prototype vessels called fold strike ships, which could warp a short distance in the middle of a battle, appearing behind an enemy formation before anyone had time to react. And beyond the visible defense rings, there were 12 more rings hidden deeper in the solar system, each loaded with long-range rail platforms and gravitational torpedo launchers. The gravitational torpedo was Nina Park's other contribution. It did not explode in the normal way. Instead, it collapsed local space around a target, briefly creating a pull so strong that the target was crushed from all sides simultaneously. It left no fire, no shrapnel. Just a crumpled hull drifting in silence. She had tested it 3 times in deep space, far from any sensors. All 3 tests had worked perfectly. Captain Owen Briggs, commanding Earth's flagship the ECS Resolute, spent the hours of the countdown running combat drills. His crew was tired but sharp. They had been training for this moment for 2 years, not knowing exactly when it would come, but always knowing it would. On the bridge beside him stood Chief Petty Officer Cal Domingo, a broad-shouldered man with a calm face and the habit of finding something funny in every situation. When the final countdown briefing ended and the command staff was filing out of the room, Cal leaned over to the tactical officer, Lieutenant Dana Ford, and said quietly that he hoped the Kreth put up at least a decent fight. Otherwise, he said, it was going to be a long trip out here for nothing. Dana did not smile. But she came close. In the hours before the deadline, Grace Gwyn composed a final message to the Kreth fleet. It was not a plea. It was not a threat. It was simply a statement. She recorded it herself in her office, speaking directly into the camera, her voice flat and steady. She said, "You have not fought humans before. You should have studied us." The message was sent to the Kreth Herald ship near Jupiter. On the other end, Doran Vel received it, listened to the translation, and did not respond. He found it strange, a doomed species sending words instead of a surrender. He assumed it was fear dressed up as pride. He had seen that before. He gave the order to advance. The fleet moved. 300 warships cutting through space in tight formation, sleek and enormous and absolutely certain of what was coming next. Doran Vel watched them from the observation window of the Dominion's fist and felt nothing except mild impatience. He wanted this finished before the end of the day. The space between Mars and Earth had been chosen carefully. It was not random. For months before the Kreth fleet ever entered the solar system, human engineers had been seeding that stretch of space with sensor buoys, relay nodes, and carefully placed debris fields. The debris looked like old junk, broken satellite parts, spent rocket bodies, scrap metal drifting in loose clouds. In reality, those debris fields were cover. They gave Earth's gray-veiled ships places to sit still and wait without looking like they were doing anything at all. The Kreth fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel exactly where the human command team had predicted. They came in tight formation, a classic Dominion entry. Hundreds of warships, shoulder to shoulder, filling the space like a wall of iron. It was the kind of formation that was meant to be seen. Meant to frighten. In all 164 campaigns, that formation had worked. The moment an enemy saw 300 Kreth warships materialize out of nowhere, most of them started calculating how to surrender. For a long moment, nothing happened. Doran Vel scanned the area. His screens showed the same thing the scouts had shown. A handful of small human ships far in the distance. Empty space everywhere else. He ordered a communications sweep. No response. He ordered a radar sweep. Nothing new. He leaned back in his command chair and told his officers that the humans had probably already given up and gone back to their planet. He said they might reach Earth and find the population waiting at the surface with their hands in the air. His officers nodded. One of them laughed softly. Then the gray veil dropped. It did not happen slowly. One moment the space around the Kreth fleet was empty. The next moment it was full. 400 human warships materialized all at once, in every direction, above, below, to the sides, behind. They had been sitting there the entire time, invisible, waiting. The Kreth fleet was surrounded before a single shot had been fired. On the bridge of the ECS Resolute, Lieutenant Dana Ford looked at her targeting screen and began reading out solutions in a calm, even voice. She did not rush. She did not shout. She called each target by number, called the solution, and waited for confirmation. Captain Owen Briggs listened to each one. Then he said a single word. Fire. The first gravitational torpedoes hit the Kreth outer escort wing. 3 destroyers on the left flank simply stopped being the shape they were supposed to be. The hulls folded inward, like paper being crushed in a fist, and then went still. No explosion. No fire. Just 3 ships that were suddenly very small and very quiet. The Kreth fleet reacted the way they always reacted, with immediate counterformation. Ships peeled away from the center, trying to create a line of battle, trying to find a front to face. But there was no front. The human ships were everywhere. Every time a Kreth formation started to form, human vessels were already behind it. Then the fold strike ships moved. 6 vessels, each one about the size of a frigate, vanished from their positions and reappeared directly behind the Kreth command cluster. They fired before anyone in the cluster had time to raise shields. 2 Kreth cruisers took direct hits. One lost its engines and began spinning. The other vented its atmosphere into space and went dark. On the Dominion's fist, Doran Vell stood up from his chair. It was the first time in years that he had stood up during a battle. He stared at the tactical display. Ships were disappearing from his screen faster than his officers could report them. He ordered a retreat to the right flank. His ships moved. The human vessels were already there. He ordered a push through the center. 3 of his destroyers tried it. None of them made it through. He could not find the edge of the human formation because there was no edge. They were completely surrounded. At the weapons station, Cal Domingo was tracking impact confirmations as fast as the system could display them. He glanced over at Dana Ford and said quietly, without looking away from his screen, that the Kreth still had no idea there were 6 more defense rings behind them that had not fired yet. Dana's eyes stayed on her own screen. She said she knew. Cal nodded and went back to work. The first hour of contact ended with 41 Kreth warships destroyed and 22 more disabled. Not one human ship had been lost. Doran Vell was not a man who panicked. He had been in difficult battles before, or at least he told himself that. He had faced species that fought back harder than expected. He had lost ships. He had taken damage. But he had always found the turning point, the moment where discipline and firepower tipped the scale and the enemy broke. He kept waiting for that moment now. It did not come. 3 times in the second and third hour of the battle, the Kreth fleet tried to reorganize. 3 times, the human ships adjusted before the formation was even finished. It was like fighting someone who could read your thoughts. Every move the Kreth made, the humans were already somewhere ahead of it, waiting. Their countermoves were not reactive. They were pre-planned. The Kreth had used the same tactics in 164 campaigns, and humanity had studied every single one of them. On Earth, in the command center deep underground, Grayson Gwynn watched the battle unfold on a wide display screen. Officers moved around her, giving updates in quiet voices. She stood with her arms at her sides, her face still, reading the numbers as they came in. Kreth ships lost, 98. Kreth ships disabled, 41. Human ships lost, 0. She asked for a status report on the Resolute. An officer told her the Resolute had taken a hit to its rear section. Engine damage. Some hull breach on the lower decks. Grace asked if Captain Briggs had pulled back. The officer shook his head. Briggs was still in the fight. She nodded once and looked back at the screen. On the Resolute, the rear hull breach had opened a corridor to space. Cal Domingo had not waited for engineers. He had picked up a sealing kit from the nearest emergency locker and gone down there himself while the battle was still going on around them. He worked for 22 minutes in a half-pressurized corridor with distant explosions shaking the walls, patching the breach section by section. When he climbed back to the bridge, his hands were still shaking slightly from the cold. He sat back down at his station, looked at his screen, and said nothing about it. Doran Vel tried to call for reinforcements. The Dominion's nearest reserve fleet was 6 hours away at faster-than-light speed. He opened the long-range communication channel and started broadcasting. Nothing went through. The signal died the moment it left the ship, absorbed by Earth's deep space relay blockers, arrays that had been placed quietly in the outer system months earlier, under the same gray veil technology that had hidden the warships. He was alone out here. There was no help coming. One of his junior commanders, a young officer named Sev Oren, approached him on the bridge. Sev was not like most Kreth officers. He was careful where others were bold, and he asked questions where others just obeyed. He told Doran Vel in a low voice that they should consider pulling back to the edge of the system to assess. He said the situation had changed. He said there was no shame in regrouping. Doran Vel looked at him for a long moment. Then he relieved Sev Oren of duty and told him to leave the bridge. Sev Oren left. He went to a crew cabin near the rear of the flagship, sat down on a bench, and stared at the floor. He had been watching the battle unfold. He had seen what the Admiral refused to see. These humans had not reacted to the attack. They had prepared for it. Everything, every position, every weapon, every timing, had been set up in advance. The Kreth had walked into something that was already waiting for them. He did not think they were going to win this. By the 4th hour, the Kreth fleet had been reduced to fewer than 30 operational ships. The escape corridor toward Jupiter, which several Kreth captains had tried to use, had been mined. 4 ships had gone into the corridor and not come out. The remaining Kreth vessels were scattered, running in different directions, some trying to reach the outer edge of the system, some circling back toward each other without any real plan. Earth's 3rd and 4th defense rings engaged the scattered ships with rail platforms firing from fixed positions. It was not dramatic. It was systematic. One ship, then the next, then the next. On his tactical display, Doran Vel counted his remaining vessels. 22. Then 18. Then 11. He stood at the center of his bridge, surrounded by officers who had nothing useful to say, watching the number fall, and somewhere in the back of his mind a thought was forming that he had never had before in his life. He whispered it quietly, almost to himself. He said it was not possible. His crew heard him. None of them answered. Because they were all thinking the same thing, and none of them had an answer for it either. The Dominion's Fist was the last major Kreth vessel still moving. The ships around it had been destroyed or disabled one by one over the course of 5 hours. Now the flagship sat alone in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by wreckage that had once been the greatest fleet the Kreth Dominion had ever sent to war. Its engines were damaged. One of its main power cores had been shut down. It was trying to jump to faster-than-light speed, its drives spinning up slowly, working against the damage. The jump failed. The drives overloaded and cut out. The ship drifted. Emergency lights came on through the corridors. On the bridge, Doran Vel stood very still, staring at the dead drive panel. His officers waited. No one spoke. Then the ECS Resolute came alongside. It moved slowly and without any threatening action. It simply positioned itself at a distance where the 2 ships could see each other clearly, and then it opened a communication channel. Captain Owen Briggs appeared on the Kreth screen. He was a plain-looking man, not young and not old, with dark circles under his eyes from 5 hours of combat. He did not look triumphant. He did not look angry. He just looked tired and honest. He told Doran Vel that he had fought a long way from home, that his crew had done everything asked of them, and that the battle was over. He said that surrender would be accepted. He said that Kreth survivors would be treated according to the laws of humanity and the interstellar conventions his people had agreed to. Then he added something that was not an offer. He said, "You had 164 chances to learn humility. You chose arrogance every time. This is where that ends." Doran Vell did not respond immediately. He looked at his screen for a long time. His officers were watching him. Then he reached forward slowly and began entering a sequence into the panel in front of him. His hands moved carefully and deliberately. His officers understood what he was doing, and none of them tried to stop him. They had lived their whole lives inside the idea that the Dominion did not lose. Surrender was a word that did not exist in their training. If they could not win, they would choose the only other ending they understood. He entered the final code for the ship's self-destruct. Owen Briggs saw what was happening on his sensors. He gave 2 fast orders. The Resolute and 2 other nearby ships activated their gravitational shielding in a wide envelope around the Dominion's fist. When the flagship exploded, the force of the blast was contained. The shielding held. Instead of debris scattering across hundreds of kilometers, the wreckage was pulled together, compressed, and held in place. Humanity collected all of it. Every piece of the Dominion's fist. Every section of hull, every piece of equipment, every record drive. All of it was gathered, catalogued, and stored. In an escape pod near the back of the flagship, Sev Oren sat in the dark and waited. He had sealed himself inside during the final minutes, moving quietly while the Admiral was focused on the bridge. He had not been trying to survive out of cowardice. He had been trying to survive because he felt, in a way he could not fully explain, that someone needed to see what had happened here and carry it back. The pod was picked up by a human recovery vessel within the hour. He was brought aboard, given medical attention for minor injuries, and treated with complete decency. No one was rough with him. No one shouted at him. They gave him food, water, and a warm place to sit. He sat quietly and watched the humans moving around him, and he began to understand something that the Dominion had never bothered to learn about this species. They were not cruel when they won. They simply won, and then they moved forward. Back on Earth, Grace and Gwyn reviewed the final numbers. 298 Kreth ships destroyed or disabled. 0 human ships lost. 14 human crew casualties, all from the hull breach on the Resolute that Cal Domingo had sealed by hand in a freezing corridor while the battle was still happening. She read the number twice. 14. She wrote each name down herself in her notebook, the way she always did after any engagement. Then she composed a message and sent it to the Kreth Dominion. The message was simple. It said, "Your fleet came to take our world. We kept every piece of it. If you send another fleet, we will return nothing at all, not even a signal. You will simply hear silence, and that silence will be your answer." Sev Oren was eventually returned to Kreth space. He went before the Dominion Council and told them everything he had seen. He described the Grey Veil. He described the gravitational torpedoes. He described the fold-strike ships. He described the defense rings that had never even fully activated because they had not been needed. He told them what he believed to be true. He said the humans had been ready before the Dominion had ever sent the ultimatum. They had studied the Kreth. They had prepared. They had been waiting, quietly, with everything in place, for however long it took. The council chamber was silent for a very long time after he finished. On Earth, long after the battle reports were filed and the recovered wreckage was catalogued and stored, Grace and Gwyn stood alone at a window in her office. The stars were bright and clear. She looked at them the way she always had, not with fear, not with hunger, but with patience. Humanity had always been a species that survived. Survived ice ages and plagues and wars with itself and every hard thing the universe had thrown at it. They had survived all of it by preparing, by thinking ahead, by refusing to quit. The galaxy had not known that yet. Now it did.